Hello and welcome to this breakout session. Today I'll be talking about tools for student advocacy on campus, but before I begin, I want to give you a brief introduction of me and why this topic, why today. So my name is Rose. I'm currently a senior at Seattle University. Before attending Seattle University, I attended St. Ignatius College Prep in San Francisco, California. And in the almost 8 years now that I have been in Jesuit education, in institutions of Jesuit education, I've spent a lot of time learning and growing into a faith that does justice and acting that out to the best of my ability. At Seattle University, I'm on student government. I have been since my freshman year, and a lot of the time that I have spent on campus, I have watched really amazing work done by the groups of students that I work with and other groups of students as well. I've also seen a lot of projects that were truly amazing get formulated and never really come to fruition because of tools that were missing and strategies for how to navigate the institutions that we are educated in and work in every day. So my hope today is to be able to share some of what I've learned with you, share some tools that I have, in the hopes that the inspiration that you gather from this weekend and the inspiration that you gather from each other turns into really amazing, successful work in your own communities in the months and years to come. So I hope that during this presentation, you'll use the chat function, talk about some projects that you're really excited about, some maybe challenges that you've had, or some successes, some things that you've learned. And I hope that that space will be an opportunity to share the wisdom that each of us has on how to be effective change makers on our campus. So please use that space as you would like, and we'll get started. So to begin with, I wanted to talk a little bit about the structure of our spaces. This session is designed for high school and college students, so there's a little bit of variation in what this looked like. So I tried to come up with kind of a broad understanding of the structure of higher education, high schools, the different spaces that we'll be in. So the hierarchy of these institutions, often they are kind of the top tier is the board of trustees. The board makes all of the decisions. They're kind of the boss. And this is generally a group of relevant, influential people that your institutions have chosen and said, we want you to be leading us into the future. The kind of more public face of our institutions are our presidents. These are often folks who are more in the public eye. Students generally are more aware of who they are as compared to the board of trustees. And they are charged with carrying out the mission or the responsibilities that the board has indicated as being important and relevant for our institutions. The Board of Regents is another group that governs kind of the upper tier. They tend to have less, they're definitely less known on our campuses, and they have different responsibilities than the Board of Trustees and the president. Kind of the next tier under that is the cabinet. Now, again, this looks very different in high schools versus universities and colleges. So keep that in mind, and also take some time, maybe after today or in the coming weeks, to take a little bit of time on maybe the website for your university or with a staff member or faculty member to learn a little bit more about what your institution looks like, because this is really important. Understanding the structure kind of will help you determine how the change that you want to make is going to happen. So again, the cabinet is kind of the next tier. Cabinet members are vice presidents. They generally have specific jobs over different categories of the university. So whoever it is that is in charge of academics, that might be the provost in a college. It might be some vice president title or assistant president in a high school. And then under that, under the cabinet positions, which again are kind of overarching leaders spread throughout the institution, are other governing bodies and key partners. So what some of this means is thinking about college campuses, there might be a faculty governing body, there might be a staff governing body. Key partners might be housing or food providers. So those are important folks to know. In high schools, again, there is a direct correlation. It's just going to be maybe a different name or different purpose, and it'll be important to find out what those groups are, and they're very different across the board, even at the university level. So now I'm just going to go through a couple tools that I think are really important if you're wanting to make change on campus. No matter what your project is, no matter if it's big or small, these are some steps that I have kind of thought about and gathered from the experiences that I have had. I'm also going to be highlighting a couple projects that students have accomplished during my time at Seattle University, or things that I've worked on, to kind of give you an idea of how some of these tools actually look and feel when you're in it and doing the work. And then at the end, I'll be sharing a little bit of kind of things to remember, things that are really important as you're going through and doing these steps that I'm going to outline. So the first thing is to identify the change that you want to make. This seems relatively obvious, and I know that, but here are some more in-depth details about what this really means. So consider some things to consider. Is there data that tells you this is something that needs to happen? Are there experiences of students that are coming to you and saying, this is something I want to see? Are you having experiences in your classroom of saying, this is injustice I'm seeing, or something that could be different, could be better on my campus? Think about the why. Why is this change necessary now? Why do I feel like this needs to be done here? This is a really important, crucial step that's going to be grounding you as you move forward in trying to make change. If you can say at any given point, this is why this has to happen, that's going to convince campus partners, relevant leaders, and other folks as to why your university, why now, why this space. And look to best practices elsewhere. Figure out, has this been done? Can I say to my faculty advisor, to my campus minister, hey, look over there, see what they're doing, I want that here. See if you can root whatever you're trying to do in something that has already been successful. That's not always going to be the case, and I definitely I don't want to quench any inspiration. So if it's not happening elsewhere, that's worth pointing out as well. That's a moment to say, this isn't being done, and we have a responsibility to do this. And make sure that you're able to have that knowledge in your mind. Having the facts is one of the most important tools that you can have as you really start to work on a project. Step number 2 is to start to plan. So again, thinking about those facts, you've done the research, you've kind of formulated in your mind. Now this is the time to start having the conversation. So who in your community would be on board with this? Maybe you've talked to somebody already and said, hey, this is something I'm thinking about. That's somebody to go have a meeting with. See what their perspective is. Maybe that person has better insight as to conversations already happening in your school or in your university that might be able to give you context for what the school or the university needs at that given time, or areas of support that you can identify. That's a moment to identify allies. Figure out where in your spaces, in your communities, are people who can support you, who can help you, who can build up this movement that you're trying to start. And have those informational conversations. Figure out, what paths am I going to need to navigate? What roads am I going to need to go down? What information am I going to need to have before I make my case? Those informational conversations will not only give you an opportunity to learn about what you need to know in order to do what you're trying to do, they will also help you kind of formulate your elevator pitch and be able to sell what you're trying to do to other groups that you think are going to want to be a part of it anyway. That's a really important honing piece, to making sure that you can convey to another individual who has a stake in what you're trying to do on what it is that you're trying to do. The next step is to determine the where. And this is when the structure of your school or your university comes in really, really handy. You have to think about what offices, departments, individuals are going to be most important in trying to make change. So maybe something that you're trying to do is diversify your curriculum at your school or university. What office gets to make that final decision? Who gets to do that? Is that going to be the provost? Is that going to be the dean of a college? Is that going to be a VP? Who gets to decide that? Knowing who gets to decide will help you determine, again, what your plan is going to be to try and implement that. It's going to help you determine who to talk to, what spaces you want to be in, where to garner support. That is a really, really important part of making change. Having an idea is great, but knowing how to implement it is incredibly important. And knowing who implements it is the key to that. It's also important to consider what is important to that office, what is important to that department, that individual. Basically, what do they care about? What is going to convince them that this is something that they should do? So if we're talking about diversifying the curriculum, as an example, maybe something to think about is the idea of retention. Diversifying the curriculum is going to make students want to stay at my school, at my university. Maybe what you want to think about is campus culture or community culture. Diversifying the curriculum is going to help this community better itself, be more open and welcoming to other members, is going to allow for greater richness in conversations and education as a whole. Those are all valuable arguments, and your job is to figure out, okay, I'm going to talk to so-and-so. This is what matters to them at this moment. And this is how I'm going to be able to convince them that this is something important that they should take on, that they should spearhead and implement for us. And then thinking about who are the intermediaries. So these are folks between you and whoever makes the final decision. These are folks that convincing them is going to be just as important as convincing the person who ends up making the decision, because they'll be in the rooms, they'll be helping you make the arguments, they'll be doing a lot of the behind the scenes work to get folks into your corner. And that's incredibly important. The next step is to continue seeking out best practices. So you did a little bit of this at the beginning when you wanted to have your facts, to have a better idea about what you were working on, and to really be able to begin to get people on board with what you're talking about. Now you're a couple steps later, you've started to have conversations, you know what your end goal is, you've started communicating with relevant parties who are going to end up making that decision. Here's the moment to really look at what other schools are doing. This is also a great opportunity to reach out to those places. There is a lot of wisdom, a lot of just so many resources that we as students have and are willing to provide to other students. So if you're working on something like divestment, which has definitely been a big thing that many institutions have been trying to implement, many student groups have been trying to implement for a very long time. Seattle University has divested. We have a plan in place. We were able to successfully have the Board of Trustees vote on that a couple of years ago. So an opportunity, if you're considering divestment, is to reach out, to find out some of the students who worked on that are still on campus, and to be able to say to them, how were you able to do this? How were you able to convince your institution that this was something that needed to happen? How were you able to implement it? What were the steps that you took? Gather that wisdom that they have within them, having already done this work, and see if there are ways that you can use some of that knowledge for yourself in your planning. This is also an opportunity to have other institutions supporting you. So maybe there are other institutions in your area that have already done something similar to what you're trying to do. Having their support is incredibly important and will help you be more effective, because they'll be able to provide maybe other contextual pieces, and they'll also just provide the support that is really necessary in this hard, time-consuming, and often frustrating work that we're each doing. Something else to consider is that what has worked well elsewhere will not necessarily work well for you. And that's also important to note and to recognize. You could definitely get feedback from another institution, a step-by-step plan of exactly how they did it and exactly what, how it happened. And then you realize, like, this isn't how my institution is going to work. Like, it's just not, it's not going to work for us. Whatever the reason is, there might be a reason. And that's very possible. Our communities are all very unique. They all have different needs, different motives, different desires. And sometimes those things are not going to be kind of copy pasted in a successful way. So you have to be able to think critically about any outside support or input that you're getting, and make sure that whatever you decide to use is really going to work for you. It is possible to get support and not use a step-by-step plan that worked elsewhere. And that's also important to consider. You can have conversations still with students that have been successful in other places, even if you're not getting all of the step-by-step information that they've gotten. You can have conversations about, did you try this? Did you try that? How did that work? Was that successful? Did you have a meeting with so-and-so? Was that helpful? And see some of the testing that was already done before that project was completed, and be able to see, like, is this something that's going to be worth my time now, or should I try something else? So having that knowledge about your own community, what's going to work for you, is incredibly important, and keep that in mind. The last step is the getting to work part. Now, this is not to say that the rest of what you've been doing isn't work. This is more thinking about the fact that this is the step when you actually start a lot of the external facing work for completing your project. So determine your how. Is it going to be effective for you and your community to do a lot of work that falls into the umbrella of activism? Should you protest? Should you stage a walkout? Should you stage a sit-in? Is that going to be the thing that is going to lead to your campus making the change that you're desiring, or making the statement to your community that you're desiring to make? Would it be more valuable to have meetings and more important for the work that you're trying to do? Is this going to mean sitting down with a ton of administrators and saying, this is what we want to see, and moving slowly up the ladder to whoever that decision maker is? Is this something where a forum or a petition would be more valuable? These are great resources if you want to gain more feedback on what's going to be best for your community. Maybe you have an idea, but you don't know yet what the best implementation strategy would be. And so a forum or a petition would be a great opportunity to gather some of that feedback and get a gauge of support that you have among other students, faculty, staff, whoever in your community you're hoping to be engaging with. The next step is make a timeline. So thinking back to the various steps, you know what you want to do, you know who ends up making the decision, you know all the facts about why this is necessary, why now, why here, you know what's worked elsewhere or what hasn't worked elsewhere. So this is the time to think about, okay, the person who makes the final decision is maybe the board of trustees. When is their next meeting? Or when is the meeting when I want them to consider this issue or this piece that I'm trying to change on campus? And working backwards to figure out, okay, these are the things that I need to do before that meeting in order to make sure that what I want on the table at that meeting is there for them. Maybe you want to start creating social media to garner further support from students around you or other community partners. Maybe you want to create those petitions, any documents, maybe you're writing letters, scheduling any forums if that's the route that you're going. This is the time to do that. So you want to have a lot of that background information done. You want to know where you're trying to go and be really, really firm in that information and in that support in order to get to this step of actually doing the thing. This is going to make sure that when you have a forum, people show up and people care about what you're working on and are there to support you. And you don't just have a forum, especially now on Zoom, with no folks. It's also really important in this step to loop in those partners. If you're trying, maybe you're trying to do, this is more for universities, but if you're fighting right now for gender neutral housing, this is the moment to reach out to all of the different student groups and other support centers that are also trying to do that. Reaching out maybe to housing and making sure that they're looped in, that you're keeping them informed about what's going on. At the end of the day, whoever is going to be impacted needs to be in support of and wanting to work with you. That's going to be really important because if, for the example of gender neutral housing, if you don't have somebody in housing in your corner, that's going to be a really hard sell to some of the other groups that are going to be responsible for making the final decision. So this is a great opportunity to just reach out to the folks you've already talked to and continue widening your circle to other students, faculty, staff members, clubs, whoever is going to be relevant to helping you make the change that you're trying to make. So again, I want to share some things to remember, some things that I've learned, and some things that are sometimes forgotten in this very challenging work that we're each doing. First is know your facts. I can't even tell you how many times projects have fallen through because students have had a great idea only to find out that this thing only impacts 3 students on campus. It impacts them, but only 3 other students. Or something that is really relevant to what's happening in our world or in our country, but isn't necessarily relevant to the physical place of your school or your university. That's not to say don't do it, but it's important to know that. So know the needs of your own community. Know why. Know why it has to be now. Know why it has to be where you are. Know why you are leading the charge. Connect, make sure that you can connect the change that you want to make to things that are relevant to your school or your university. And again, this is going to be something that's going to help you be more successful long-term in being able to make change. If your university has a vested interest in whatever the change that you're making will help them solve. It's a little bit of working the system, I'll admit that, but long-term, it really does lead to more effective change making that's more lasting. So it's something to consider. The next thing is know what you want. So it's great to have an idea. It's great to have a bunch of people agree with you on that idea. But if you don't know what end goal you're trying to achieve, that can be a barrier to actually making that change. It's important to have an idea of what your end goal looks like. Be clear in what your desires are. Be clear in what you convey to other people as you're trying to get them on board with what you're doing. It's also important to remain open to other ideas or input about ways to compromise or to be more effective. So you may have a great idea, know exactly how you want to implement it, and go talk to one of those early campus partners and say, this is what I want to do. And they may say, that is not going to work, but this will work. And it's a slightly different version of what you had imagined that will lead to that same end goal, which is why knowing that end goal is so important. Because that will help you better navigate the systems in order to achieve it. But being open to those compromises and those alternatives is crucial to building those coalitions and really being effective and successful long term. A third thing to remember is that things take time. Now, this is the hardest thing to really internalize as students. We are only on our campuses for a short amount of time. 4 years, not that long. So it's hard to hear that things take time, and it's often frustrating and excruciating and not fun to do a lot of this work because of all of the barriers that exist within our institutions. Institutions are slow moving. They're often stubborn. They're stuck in the ways that things have always been. They're not always ready for change. They're not always ready for us to be as loud as we are prepared to be and desiring to be in order to make changes. So in order to be effective, it's important to remember that this is not going to be a short process, especially the bigger changes when we're talking about policy change or divestment or some of these bigger justice issues that we are all being inspired this weekend to make. These are not, 1 quarter, 1 semester problems. These are things that are going to take some time. And so being prepared for that, building up your support so that you know that it's there and you can lean on them when things don't go your way. Building up that support outside of your campuses so that when you hit a wall or a roadblock, you're able to reach out and say, I need some options. I need to talk through what happened. I need some suggestions on how to continue moving forward. And know that those resources exist to you. You just have to reach out and find them. Something else kind of in line with knowing that things take time is build something sustainable. Things take time and you're only on campus for a specific amount of time. So it's really important to help younger leaders continue to develop and be a part of the movements that you're trying to make. This is going to ensure that if you graduate and whatever you're trying to do isn't done, that movement continues. This is really the thing to remember. These projects are bigger than us. The change that we're trying to make is for a more just world. They're not for us to get all of it done in whatever amount of time we've allocated and be there. Sometimes it means not being there for the completion. So make sure that you, in your planning, are bringing in folks who are going to be who are just as passionate and just as determined to make the change as you are. Bring them in. Make sure that they feel like they have the tools and the information and the resources to continue the work after you've left, if needed. And again, this really is more about thinking about the fact that these things are bigger than any of us individually. And that's kind of the most important thing, I think, of anything that I've shared today, is this relationship of making this change for more than you and making sure that you're bringing other people in to continue the work, to make the project or the change that you're trying to make about making the change instead of about you. So that's kind of all I have for you today. I hope that you've gathered some amount of information or support or help or have some idea about how to implement some of what you're thinking about doing on your own campuses. I've left my email and my Instagram handle on the screen, so feel free to reach out if you have questions or if you're working on a project and don't know where to start or don't know if things are happening elsewhere. I hope to be a resource to each of you as you begin or continue the change making that you're already doing on your campus. And I'm really thankful and grateful for all of you attending this session today and engaging in this conversation. So I wish you all the best, and I hope you have a great rest of your IFTJ experience.